no numbers, there's no pictures, there's no videos, there's no gameplay. I don't like it.
Yo, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope everyone's having a good day so far. Today, we're going to get back into Sunrise Stories. Today, we're going to be going over culture. So, this story is actually, it was a discussion I saw in the Free Realm Sunrise Discord when I was in it. I saw, it was like in lore discussion, I think, where people were talking about like, certain, like, properties in the lore, like I think the whole conversation was about the Chuggawugs and how like there's different factions of Chuggawugs. Like I believe there's like, it's weird because there's like 3 different factions. There's the Thuggawugs, there's the Chuggawug Guard, and then there's just like the regular Chuggawugs. So it's really odd. And I wanted to tell a story about that because also in the comics, there is actually a point in the story where Darkthorn gets like exiled or banished or whatever from Sanctuary. It was either that or like accused of like treason or whatever. But the whole point is that the Chuggawug Guard goes with Darkthorn and they become Chuggawug Guards. So that's what this whole story is kind of be about. So yeah, let's dive into it. It was another dark and gloomy day in Briarwood. I chose to leave my old life of kart racing behind and wanted to work alongside my father in the Tanglewood Fort. His name was Chuggug and used to be a captain at the fort, but unfortunately he was summoned by Queen Darkthorn to guard her in the palace. So I ended up taking his position as captain in the fort, and after a few months here, I don't mind it. But I feel like I'm meant for something greater. General Spatnug walked up next to me while I was guarding the fort. He's been my superior since I arrived. He asked, "How goes guard duty, Captain Junior?" So, before we keep going, I do want to mention that Chuggug and Junior are in the Free Realms comics. So, I am including a lot of like comic aspects to Sunrise Stories. There's a lot of people that are in that were in the comics that I want to include with lore going forward. Junior and Chuggug being one of them because I do think they are vital characters in the comics. I don't know, I just wanted to include them in this because I think it's super important. But anyway, let's continue. I shrugged and said, "It's not passing time like I'd hope, but it's relaxing, I suppose." He chuckled and said, "Well, after 3 months at the fort, you should be getting used to our weekly positions." I nodded and asked, "Hey, Spat, have you ever wanted to do anything else with your life?" He glared at me and said, "There's nothing else in this life to do besides guard our home with our lives, unless you join the circus that is Wuggachug or resort to thievery." So he's referring to the fact that you could either be a regular Chuggawug at Wuggachug, you know, drinking sarsaparilla and all that, or you could be a Thuggawug resorting to stealing. So he's just referring to those things, like what else is there to do other than guard Briarwood? So there's like this like cultural, that's why I named it culture in the first place, because there's this like divide, you know, there's this divide of you could either be lazy, you could steal, or you could, you know, defend your queen in Briarwood. Like what else is there to do? So like all these Chuggawugs have different beliefs. And I don't think in this story I explored the Thuggawug like Thuggawug side of things, because I think like, you know, that side of Chuggawug is like the stealing is wrong, but I mean, I think if we were to like break it down internally, like I think the whole Thuggawug thing is like, you know, these Chuggawugs are only stealing because, you know, I don't know, I think they just do it to do it because like it's just such a weird like divide in the culture of all the Chuggawugs, because there's the lazy ones, there's the ones that want to do work, and then there's just like the ones that don't want to do anything at all. So I don't really explore that too much, but I do explore like the Chuggawugs and the regular guards. So anyway, let's keep going. I sighed and said, "I guess if this is all there is, I won't ask again. I suppose this is better than being a subpar car racer. He laughed and said, "That's the spirit, Junior. Now, before I relieve you of your post for the day, Commander Clugging-Crush would like a word with you. Said it's urgent." I nodded and went straight to the commander. I went to the top of the fort, entered his tent, and stood ready to receive his orders. He turned around, saluted me, and then asked, "Junior, do you remember the events that occurred last year?" I thought for a moment and then said, "Sort of, sir. I remember being at Seaside working on carts, and then everything around me started to look like Briarwood." So that's kind of the general theme of like what Sacred Grove would look like. If you were to picture it, and I believe I actually like include imagery to help. This is the whole reason why I have images. This is a visual novel, so like you're supposed to like look at it and go, "Oh, I have images to reference to." If you were to picture what Sacred Grove looked like when Darksheet kind of took over with Gloam, it would have looked like Briarwood, because Briarwood is like the darkest. Like, I don't even consider Black Spore like the darkest place in Sacred Grove. It's Briarwood, because Black Spore's more of spooky, you know, it's a swamp. It's not too crazy, but Briarwood's like, that's the darkest of the dark. So yeah, let's continue. He nodded, sat down, and said, "And then everything returned to normal. Queen Darkthorn had a plan to transfer our realm to be like Briarwood, and then it failed. Currently, she resides in the Briarheart Palace, contemplating your next move." I looked at him puzzled and asked, "I see, sir, but what does her next move have to do with me?" He stood up and said, "I have an assignment for you that will benefit us greatly. The Queen believes we need to recruit more soldiers to be ready for what comes next. So I'd like you to go out to Sacred Grove and find Chugwugs worthy to wear our armor." I nodded and said, "Affirmative, sir. I won't let you down." Before I left, I noticed he had some scars on his skin, so I asked, "Sir, did you get into a big fight during that time a year ago?" He sighed and said, "A group of 4 people decided to raid Tanglewood Fort. Stole a wolf from one of our cages. Some wolf-like creature attacked me and left some marks on me. Junior, make a note not to mess with the wolves." I nodded and said, "Will do, sir." So, back in Luck of the Draw. Again, assuming you read it, I don't know why you'd be watching this if you didn't, but back in Luck of the Draw, there was this whole thing where the final hero was introduced. And again, his name slips my mind. I swear to God, I think I only remember Bryce's name because he was such a big main character. But there was a whole thing where the 4th hero got introduced, and the whole thing was he had a pet wolf. And it was like, you know, it got taken from him. The pet wolf got taken from him, and it was locked away in a cage in Tanglewood Fort. So they had to raid the fort. The 4th hero could turn into a werewolf, and he attacked Commander Clugging-Crush and left some scars on him and knocked him out. So yeah, that's what happened. I made it like I tied things. I love tying things together, because writing Luck of the Draw meant like, hey, now I can tie some things together in some of my stories, which I think was super neat. So yeah, that's that. Let's keep going. I left the tent and set out to recruit Chugwugs to our cause. I started in Greenwood Forest. A lot of Chugwugs decided to make camp there after our split years ago. At least that's what Spat told me. I approached one of the camps in the forest and saw some archers who looked just like me. So I went up to them, saluted, and asked, "Good afternoon, bowman. I was wondering if you'd like to serve in Briarwood." They all looked at each other and bursted out laughing. One of them stopped to get a word out and said, "Buddy, you're barking up the wrong tree. Why don't you try asking some other gullible Chugwug to join your noble cause? Because as you can see, we're defending the most important force in all of Sacred Grove." So I didn't really expand on these guys. There was like archers in Greenwood Forest, and they're kind of like, I would say they're not in the realm of Thuggawugs, but they're very like close. Like all they do is guard the forest. So like there's clearly like different Chugwug factions, which is pretty wild in itself. But I would like to think like the Chugwugs that are in Greenwood Forest, like I think they're part of their own like troop, if you will. They're not like a huge faction. They're not like as big as like Thuggawugs, which I think even Thuggawugs are small in their own respect. And then there's like the Chugwugs, and then the Chugwags that are in Wugachug, and then there's the ones that are guards. It's very confusing when you break it all down. It's like, why are there all these factions of Chugwags? Why can't they all just work together, you know? But yeah, anyway, let's keep going. I nodded and said, "Will do, sir. Sorry for wasting your time." I went away from their campsite and made my way deeper to the deeper parts of Greenwood Forest. As I made my way through the forest, I kept wondering if this was a waste of time or not, whether I should turn back or look somewhere else. I was about to turn back until someone exclaimed, "Hey, give me your coins!" I looked at him and asked, "Why would I do that?" He froze and stared at me and then said, "Well, because I said so. That's why it's called a holdup." I shook my head at him and said, "You're not doing a very good job at it. Tell you what, I'll give you some coins if you can tell me your name." He nodded and said, "My name is Jojo, Thugawug in training. I'll take those coins now." So Jojo is an actual character in Fairy Realms. He's got his own image. He looked like a very weird Thugawug, and I don't even know if he was in training. I just wrote that in, but I do think it was really funny to do, to kind of include him in as a character. So yeah, he's a little Thugawug in training. What's funny, he has a sock over his head. It just it's super funny. And there are actual, like, the actual Thugawugs, they kind of look like the looks like that one McDonald's character, the little bandit looking dude. That's kind of what they look like if I were to describe them. But Jojo's like a Walmart knockoff version of that, if anything. So anyway, I smiled and handed him a bag of coins and asked, "Jojo, how would you like to be a soldier of the Chugwug Guard?" He thought about it and said, "I don't know. I've been training my whole life to be a Thugawug, like my brothers and sisters. I wanted to prove to them I could be more than just a letdown." Took a long look at him, put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Listen here, Jojo. I joined the Guard because of my father, and not because I wanted to prove myself, but because I had to do what was right for Sacred Grove. And that meant giving up my dream of being a kart racer." He looked up at me and asked, "So you're saying I should give up trying to be a Thugawug? What's the point of the joining your Guard if I'm failing?" Oh my god. I have to edit. Edited. Bam. What's the point of joining your Guard if I'm failing at this? I sighed and said, "There's more to the Guard than just you. When you put on this armor, you become part of something bigger. You have a team that rallies behind you, regardless of how many times you need a potion." He took off his sock mask, threw it on the ground, and then said, "Sign me up then. I'm tired of wasting my time being someone I'm not." I smiled and said, "That's what I like to hear. Now, before we head back, we have to make one last stop in Wugachug. Let's get going." He nodded, and we set out for the journey. We arrived in Chugwug, and there was a festival afoot, not surprising as they happen every day. I approached one of the locals and asked, "What calls for sarsaparilla today?" The Chugwug turned and said, "Just celebrating being alive, Fred. No better day to celebrate them while you still can." I stared at him, then realized what he was referring to. A year ago, Wugachug nearly lost the supply of sarsaparilla due to the Glum invasion. Vines with thorns on them wrapped around the biggest supply and nearly burst. That is, until the citizens of Snow Hill came down to help them chop the vines down. Had it burst, we wouldn't be standing in Wugachug today, so I smiled when he told me. So I did actually, this is something I really touch on in Samurai Stories. I think, like, there is a fact of the matter, like, this Glum invasion happened in Luck of the Draw, and I think that was such a big thing. And the thing is, like, there was time that passed during that, because how I do Luck of the Draw, how I do the whole Glum invasion thing, is that, you know, Bryce and the other three heroes have this battle with Dark Cheat. They lose, and suddenly they see that the sun is setting. They fall asleep, and they realize they've been asleep for 8 years due to Valerian telling them that. But the thing is, in that 8 years, there's a time passing. There's this huge time pass where something happened at each location in Sacred Grove. I go over that, like, in a big way, right? So I think that's super important in Samurai Stories, that I kind of elaborate on, hey, this is what happened at each of these locations, and this is why it's so important. So, like, for Wugachug, the sarsaparilla supply almost gone. There's also, like, you go back to, like, Homestead, crops were polluting, you know, the Glum skies or whatever were polluting the crops. You go back to like Lineage, there was an attack on Lakeshore, they dried up the lake, etc. So in each story, I'm gonna like point out like different things that happened throughout all the stories. There's gonna be some situation where like, hey, the Glum invasion did this, did that, etc. So anywho, let's keep going. Where do we leave off? I lost my train of thought, dude. I was just going into it. Right here. He asked, might I ask how a Thugwug and a Chugwug guard wound up here in Wugachug? I looked at Jojo, then back at him and said, well, that depends. I'll need your name before getting into the details. He smiled and said, name's Arpy. I'm a brewmaster here at Wugachug, born and raised on Sarsaparilla. So yeah, and again, there's brewmasters. There's actual like Chugwugs. If there's anything I want on Chugwugs, I need more lore and context on the factions. Like I want a list of like every faction in like Chugwug history. Like I will literally, if Realm Sunrise does eventually come out, or when it does, or whatever, the first thing I'm probably gonna do is look into like Chugwug lore, get some like details, you know, some hard-hitting facts about like where they all like reside in certain factions. So anyway, let's continue. I shook his hand and said, my name's Junior and this is Jojo. I was sent on a mission from Briarwood to recruit more soldiers to our guard. He thought for a moment, then asked, why? I looked down funny and said, the commander believed it to be the best course of action to recruit other Chugwugs to our guard. He shook his head and said, look around, Junior. We almost lost this place a year ago and it's still here. We're all here together celebrating what we saved. I looked at him and asked, what does that have to do with my mission? He sighed and looked at both of us and said, your mission is fruitless. I see your guard armor and your Thugwug garb, but I see one of my own. Forget the split we had a decade ago and come home. I remember my father telling me about that time when the Chugwugs were all united. But there was also a time when an assassination occurred and our people were wrongfully banished. This caused a split between all of us. So there's that whole banishing thing, right? It created the Chugwug guard and the Thugwugs, causing split in our unity. I never understood what it meant until now, but the way he looked at the both of us, Jojo didn't understand, but I did. So I finally said, you're right. I dropped everything after last year to help my father in the guard. But like Jojo here, I feel like I've been wasting my time. I threw my armor on the ground and Jojo did the same. Arpy smiled at us and said, this is only the beginning of our celebrations here at Wugachug. I hope that one day we'll all be united again. I nodded and said, count on it. I'll make sure that we are united again, even if I have to go through my father to do it. He smiled and then we went to celebrate, knowing we were the future of the Chugwags. So funny enough, I almost ended the story here, but I wanted to leave the story with like a little bit of here's what's gonna happen in the future. So yeah, Junior like completely you know, he gives up his Chugwug guard position because, you know, RP explains like, hey, you're still one of my own. That's what I love about like the whole faction thing is like, I think the Chugwugs, the ones that are in Wugachug, that aren't with any factions at all, that are just regular Chugwugs, they see other Chugwugs that are like, hey, you're one of us. You're one of our own. So, like, even the guard in Briarwood, they'd probably see them and go, hey, you're one of us. Like, that's why I looked at all the divides in the factions and the fact that, you know, someone in the FRS Discord brought it up, and I was like, that's very interesting. Like, you could easily write up a story about that. And I think even in, you know, whatever I write in the future, I'm definitely going to include this whole, like, you know, these factions, this divide, but I do want to, like, kind of bring all the Chugwugs together, and I think that is the goal of, like, you know, Junior and Jojo joining the Chugwugs. So, yeah. Anyway, let's finish up here. A few months later, Commander Cluggencrush reported to Briarheart to bring up a matter with Captain Chugug, which is Junior's father. He arrived and Chugug stepped out of the palace. He shook the commander's hand and said, "Good to see you, Clug. Hope the fort's holding up well." He sighed and said, "Fort's good, but that's not what I came to talk to you about. It's about Junior." Chagug took a step back and asked, "Is he okay? Did something happen to him?" He cleared his throat and said, "He's fine, but you're going to want to read this." He handed him some sort of flyer that read, "Unity for Chugawugs," and the entire flyer looked like Junior's handwriting. He threw the flyer to a vine beast and said, "If my son wishes to preach unity, so be it. From this day forward, he is no longer my son." Clug and Crush looked worried and asked, "But he's your son. Surely there's some explanation for this." He shook his head and said, "Whatever it is, I don't want to hear it. The past is in the past. We've got more important things to worry about, like the future of Sacred Grove." He looked at Chugug and asked, what has Darkthorn been up to?" Chugug began heading back for the palace, turned and said, "Oh, you'll see. What she's planning will be far greater than the Glum invasion." He went back into the palace without a second look back at the flyer. So, yeah, that's kind of where I end it. Chugug basically disowns his son because, he left the garden. Now he wants unity for Chugawugs. And he thinks, like, that is, like, the lowest, like, form of betrayal. Like, he's like, whatever, we're moving on, There's more important things than his son, apparently. Which is wild, like, I think, like, I wrote that in because I thought, if Chugug is working close to Darkthorn, I don't think he's gonna care about what his son does anymore. I think if he was still in the right, he'd be like, "Oh, cool, he's helping with the cause," but now he's not. So, But yeah, I kind of leave the story with like a almost open ending to be like, hey, this is what's gonna happen in the future now. Like, this is definitely gonna, I'm definitely gonna work this story into like what I write next, which I'm super excited about. But yeah, that's what is culture. That's the culture story. If you guys enjoyed it, thank you. I appreciate it a ton. If you enjoyed the video, thank you. It means a lot. And yeah, that's the video. Anywho, I will see you guys later. Bye!